They moved without telling me. My son, my daughter-in-law, my 2 grandchildren, they packed up their lives and vanished. I found out when the birthday card I sent to my grandson came back to my little post office box, scarred with a yellow sticker that said, "Address unknown." For 40 years I was the postmistress of my town. The mail was my gospel, a sacred promise of connection. To have my own love returned as undeliverable was a cruelty I couldn't have imagined. They thought they could erase me, that a clean break was as simple as changing a zip code. They were about to learn that a postmistress knows a thing or two about forwarding addresses, especially when it comes to a will. Before I begin, thank you for being here. For being part of this community. If you believe in the power of a woman finding her voice and reclaiming her life, then you are in the right place. Please, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. It truly means the world to me. Now let me tell you what they did to me. My name is Martha Green, and for 80 years, my life has been a study in loyalty and logistics. I was born in a small, vibrant town called Aburi, nestled in the green hills of Ghana, a place where the air itself felt alive. My world then was the scent of red earth after a rainfall, the sweet, heavy perfume of mangoes ripening on the branch, and the constant musical chorus of my family's laughter. Life was woven from community, from shared meals and stories told on verandas as the sun went down. But I was a girl with a dream that stretched across an ocean, a dream of America, a place that shimmered in my mind with the promise of boundless opportunity. I came here in my 20s, a young woman with a heart full of a nervous hope so powerful it felt like a physical presence. I left behind the hills of Aburi for the mountains of North Carolina, settling in Brevard, a town whose lush greenery was the closest I could find to the home I had left. The journey was not easy. There were years of loneliness, of working 2 jobs, of navigating a culture that was so different from my own. But I was determined. I earned my citizenship with a pride so fierce it felt like a second heartbeat, a sacred vow I made to this new land. And I built my American dream, piece by careful piece. For 40 years I was the postmistress of this small mountain town. The post office on Main Street was more than my job. It was my ministry. I was the keeper of the town's connections, the custodian of its joys and sorrows. I knew the satisfying heft of a wedding invitation, the flimsy lightness of a postcard from a vacationing family, the grim official weight of a letter from the government. I saw sons go off to war and celebrated their safe return through the V-mail they sent home. I saw love blossom through handwritten letters exchanged between shy teenagers, and I felt the quiet sadness of a correspondence that slowly, painfully faded away. The mail was a sacred trust. A letter sent was a promise made. An address was a place a person belonged. These were the certainties upon which I built my life. The gospel of reliability I preached through the diligent sorting and delivery of every piece of mail that passed through my hands. I built a good life. A simple, orderly life. I married a kind man, a fellow postal worker named Samuel, and together we bought a small, sturdy house with a porch that looked out at the majestic sleeping shapes of the Blue Ridge Mountains. After he passed from a sudden heart attack far too young, I remained. The house became my sanctuary, the garden my solace. My greatest pride, the culmination of my American dream, was my son, David. I poured everything into him, every hope and every dollar. I made sure he had the education I could only dream of, the opportunities one had crossed an ocean to find. He was smart, ambitious, and he moved to the big city of Charlotte, where he built a successful career in corporate logistics. He was my American success story. He married a woman named Sarah first, a sweet, gentle schoolteacher with a heart as open as the sky. They gave me 2 beautiful grandchildren, a boy and a girl. For a time my life was full. But David's ambition was a restless, hungry thing. He decided Sarah wasn't the right fit for the upwardly mobile life he envisioned. He left her and their 2 small children for Jessica, a woman as sleek and modern and cold as Charlotte's glass towers. It broke my heart to see that first family fractured, to see the pain in Sarah's eyes and the confusion in my grandchildren's faces. But David was my son, and my love for him was a stubborn, deep-rooted vine. I accepted Jessica. I embraced my new grandchildren, Liam and Olivia, with all the love in my heart, determined to be a bridge between the 2 halves of my son's life. I never lost touch with Sarah completely. My sense of duty and a quiet, abiding affection for the woman who had first made me a grandmother wouldn't allow it. Every Christmas I would receive a school photo of the children she was raising so well on her own, and I would send back a card with a small, heartfelt check, a quiet acknowledgement of the family that had been left behind, a promise that they were not forgotten. My life in retirement settled into a peaceful, predictable rhythm. I had my garden where I grew tomatoes and okra that reminded me of my mother's stews. I had my church group, a circle of women whose friendship was a warm, comforting quilt. And I had my correspondence. My rituals of connection with David's family were the anchors of my year. I never missed a birthday. I never forgot a holiday. Sending those cards, those small checks tucked inside, was my way of bridging the miles between my quiet mountain town and their bustling city life. It was my way of saying, I am here. I love you. You are remembered. It was the most important mail I would ever send. The second week of May was my grandson Liam's birthday. He was turning 12, the age where a boy begins to become a man. I went to the drugstore and spent a long time in the card aisle, searching for the perfect one, rejecting dozens that were too silly or too sentimental. I finally chose a card with a picture of a clear, rushing mountain stream on the front, a piece of my world to send to him and his. At my small kitchen table, the one Samuel and I had shared for 30 years, I wrote my message in my neat, practiced script, the cursive I had learned in a mission school in Ghana and perfected over a lifetime. Happy 12th birthday to my wonderful grandson Liam. I am so proud of the young man you are becoming. I hope you have a day as special as you are. All my love, Grandma. I took a crisp $50 bill from my purse, money I had set aside for my small pension, and tucked it carefully inside the card. I sealed the envelope, my movements precise and certain. I wrote the address in Charlotte, an address I knew as well as my own, a place I had sent dozens of cards and packages over the years. I affixed the stamp, making sure it was perfectly aligned in the top right corner, a small, professional habit I had never lost. The next morning I walked to the post office. It felt strange to be on this side of the counter, a customer in the place where I had once been the authority. I greeted the new postmistress, a young woman named Susan whom I had trained myself, and I felt a familiar sense of pride. The system was in good hands. The feeling of dropping a letter into the mail slot was as familiar and comforting as my own breathing. I pushed the envelope through the brass opening and heard the soft thud as it landed in the bin below. I felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. A promise made. A connection affirmed. The mail was on its way. In my 80 years I had learned that many things in life are uncertain. Love, health, the weather over the mountains, but the mail was not one of them. A letter, properly addressed, always found its home. I had built my life on that certainty. I had no idea that my entire world was about to be returned to sender. A week passed, a slow, pleasant rhythm of early summer days in the mountains. I tended my garden, the rich North Carolina soil a comfort to my hands. I imagined Liam opening his card, his face lighting up at the sight of the crisp $50 bill. I pictured him showing it to his mother, my message of love read and received. Perhaps he would call, his voice a little deeper than the last time we spoke, to say thank you. This small act of connection was a cornerstone of my quiet life, a ritual that affirmed my place as a grandmother, a matriarch even from a distance. The miles between Brevard and Charlotte melted away with the simple act of sending a letter. On a Tuesday morning I made my daily walk to the post office to check my box. The air was cool and smelled of pine. I greeted Susan, the new postmistress, who was sorting mail with a focused intensity one recognized well. "Morning, Mrs. Green," she said with a warm smile. I smiled back, unlocked the small metal door of my box and reached inside. There were the usual things. A circular from the grocery store, a bill from the electric company, and one other envelope. My own. I stared at it for a long moment, my mind processing it with a professional, detached curiosity before any personal alarm could set in. The envelope was my own handwriting, the address clear and correct. But scarred across the front, stamped in a harsh clinical purple ink that seemed to violate the very paper, were the words, "Attempted not known." And affixed beside it, like a badge of shame, was a bright yellow sticker, a flag of failure, bearing a phrase that, to a woman of my profession, was a declaration of absolute defeat. Return to sender, unable to forward. My first thought was of error. A new mail carrier, perhaps unfamiliar with the route. A substitute who didn't bother to check the name on the box. It was an annoyance, a failure of the system I had upheld for 4 decades, but it was surely just a mistake. I took the envelope home, my brow furrowed with a mild, professional irritation. I would call David, have a little laugh about the incompetence of the new generation of postal workers, and get the matter sorted out. Sitting at my kitchen table, the returned letter lying before me like a piece of evidence, I decided to call. I dialed David's cell phone number, the one I had on a list by my telephone, the one I had called just a month ago to wish him a happy anniversary. I listened to it ring once, twice. Then a cold, robotic voice cut through the line, a voice devoid of any human warmth. The number you have dialed has been disconnected. No further information is available. A prickle of unease. That was strange. David was meticulous about his professional life. A disconnected phone was not his style. Perhaps he had gotten a new phone, a new number for his new promotion. I tried Jessica's number. The same result. The same cold, robotic voice delivering the same sterile message. The number you have dialed has been disconnected. The unease began to curdle into a genuine, creeping dread. I looked at the returned envelope on my table. The yellow sticker seemed to glare at me, its message suddenly taking on a more sinister, personal meaning. Not known. How could they not be known? They had lived at that address for 6 years. I had visited them there, had held my grandchildren in that very living room. My hands trembling slightly, I went to my writing desk and pulled out my old leather-bound address book. I found the number for their home landline, a number I hadn't called in years, a relic from a time before everyone had a phone in their pocket. I dialed it, my heart beginning to beat a little faster, a frantic drum against my ribs. A different robotic voice answered this time, a cheerful, upbeat recording that was somehow more chilling than the last. We're sorry. The number you have reached is no longer in service. Thank you for calling. I hung up the phone and sat in the sudden, profound silence of my small house. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, a sound that had always been a comfort, now sounded like a hammer striking an anvil, each tick a blow against my heart. The professional irritation was gone, replaced by a cold, hollowing fear. This was not a mistake. This was not a series of coincidences. A family does not disconnect all of their phones at once. A family does not disappear from an address they have occupied for years without a word, without a forwarding order, without a single simple notification. I picked up the envelope again. The $50 bill inside made it feel heavy, a small, dead weight. My loving message, my pride in my grandson, my connection to my family, it had all been sent out into the world with love and hope, and it had come back rejected, stamped with the brutal indifference of the system I had so loved. The system had not failed. The system had delivered a message. The message was that my son, my daughter-in-law, my grandchildren were gone. They had vanished from their life without telling me, without a word of explanation, without a simple goodbye. I looked at the yellow sticker, at the stark, brutal finality of its words. Address unknown. It was more than just a postal directive. It was a statement about my place in their lives. I was no longer a part of their map. My letters, my love, my very existence had no valid address in their world. I was the one who was unknown. The pain was a physical thing. It started in my chest, a deep, crushing ache, and spread through my limbs, leaving me cold and weak. I, Martha Green, who had spent a lifetime ensuring that every letter found its home, was now holding the proof that my own love was undeliverable. I sat there for hours as the afternoon sun slanted across the floor, the returned envelope lying on the table like a death certificate for a relationship I never knew was already dead. The certainty of the mail had been the one constant in my life. Now its only certainty was that I had been utterly, completely, and deliberately left behind. For 2 days I was adrift in a fog of grief and confusion. The returned envelope sat on my kitchen table, a constant, mocking reminder of my own erasure. Every time I looked at it, the yellow sticker seemed to burn a little brighter, a brand of rejection. I moved through my small house like a ghost, the silence amplifying the storm in my head. The routines that had anchored my life, tending the garden, reading the paper, felt meaningless. What was the point of order in my own life when the most fundamental order of all, that of a mother and her child, had been so thoroughly broken? But I am a daughter of a buri, where the women are as strong as the ancient trees on the hillsides. And I am the retired postmistress of Brevard, North Carolina. I'm not a woman who sits in the fog for long. My life has been one of order, of systems, of finding answers. On the third day, the grief, still a raw and open wound, began to share space with something else. A familiar, formidable feeling, the quiet, methodical resolve of the postmistress. The need to solve a problem. My first step was to treat it as a professional inquiry, a piece of lost mail that required investigation. I drove into town and went to the library. I had never been very comfortable with computers. I preferred the tactile certainty of paper and ink, but I knew they held information. I sat down with the town librarian, a kind young woman named Emily whom I had known since she was a little girl coming in for story hour. I seem to have lost touch with my son's family in Charlotte, I said, my voice carefully neutral, betraying none of the turmoil inside me. I was wondering if you could help me look them up. Emily's face was full of gentle concern. Of course, Mrs. Green. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, her movements swift and sure. She searched public records, property databases. I watched the screen, my heart a tight, painful knot in my chest. Well, that's odd, Mrs. Green, she said after a moment, her brow furrowed. According to the Mecklenburg County property records, the house at this address was sold 6 weeks ago. The new owners are a family named Peterson. 6 weeks. They had been gone for 6 weeks. They had packed up their lives, sold the home I had helped them buy, and started over while I was still happily tending my garden, blissfully unaware that I had been amputated from their family. The knowledge was a fresh stab of pain, but I kept my face a mask of placid inquiry. Is that so? I said, my voice steady. Do you have any idea where they might have moved? Let me see, Emily said, her curiosity now piqued. Your daughter-in-law's name is Jessica, you said? He typed the name into a search engine, and there was my son's new life, displayed in the cold, bright glow of a computer screen. The search results were dominated by a single, slick, professional-looking blog. The title was Curated by Jessica, and the tagline read, Designing a Life of Intentionality and Joy. The home page was a picture of Jessica, David, Liam, and Olivia, all dressed in coordinating shades of beige and cream, smiling serenely in front of a house I didn't recognize, one with a modern, angular design and a backdrop of unfamiliar, scrubby-looking trees. It looks like they moved to Austin, Texas, Emily said softly, sensing the gravity of the moment. This blog post is from a month ago. The title is Our Next Chapter, Embracing the Freedom of a Clean Slate. I asked her to click on it. The words on the screen were a masterclass in passive-aggressive New Age cruelty. Jessica wrote in breathless, aspirational prose about their family's decision to shed the baggage of the past and release relationships that no longer served their journey. For so long, she wrote, we felt tethered to old obligations, to a life that wasn't truly ours. Moving to Austin was more than just a change of scenery. It was a conscious uncoupling from the energies that were holding us back. It was about curating our circle, surrounding ourselves only with people who reflect our forward-facing vision. It's not always easy, and it can feel ruthless to some, but true self-care sometimes means choosing the freedom of a clean break over the weight of history. I read the paragraph twice, the blood turning to ice in my veins. I was the baggage. I was the old obligation. I was the energy holding them back. My love, my history, my very identity as their mother and grandmother, was something to be released, like a bad habit. My 80 years of life, my journey from Ghana, my 40 years of service, it was all just history, a weight they had heroically shrugged off. Emily, bless her heart, scrolled further down the page, her silence a comforting presence beside me. The blog was filled with pictures of their new life in Austin. Pictures of them at trendy restaurants, at outdoor music festivals, at a farmer's market buying organic produce. They looked happy, carefree, and utterly untroubled by the mother they had abandoned without a word. The final, crushing piece of evidence was a post from just a few days ago on Liam's birthday. It was a picture of him smiling in front of a large, elaborate cake, surrounded by a group of new friends. The caption, written by Jessica, read, Celebrating our amazing boy's 12th birthday, Austin style. So blessed to be on this new adventure with our incredible family, embracing a future with no strings attached. No strings attached. My $50 bill, my loving message, my connection to him, was a string she had deliberately, proudly cut. I thanked Emily for her help, my voice a quiet, steady monotone that betrayed none of the tempest raging inside me. I walked out of the library and into the bright Carolina sunshine, my mind a cold, orderly ledger. The grief was gone now, burned away by the white-hot fury of understanding. This was not a thoughtless act. It was a philosophical one. They had a creed, a gospel of curated selfishness, and I was the sacrifice they had laid on its altar. I went home and took the returned envelope from the kitchen table. I looked at my own neat handwriting, at the useless address, at the mocking yellow sticker. I had spent my life believing in the system, in the promise that a connection once made would be honored. They had used that belief against me. They had counted on my quiet dignity, on my assumption of error, to give them a head start on their new, curated life. But a postmistress knows more than just how to send mail. She knows how to track it. She knows how to find people who don't want to be found. And she knows better than anyone the power of a forwarding address. My son and his wife had written me out of their ledger. I was about to open my own, and I would make a new entry. An entry that would change the final accounting of their lives forever. The fire that Jessica's blog had ignited in me did not rage out of control. It settled into a low, steady, purposeful heat. It was the heat I needed to forge a new plan. My life had been one of service, of quiet duty, of ensuring that messages reached their intended destination. I now had one final important message to deliver, and it would be the most consequential of my life. My grief had been a private affair. My response would be a matter of public record. My first stop was the office of Mr. Abernathy, the same lawyer who had handled my husband's will 20 years ago. He was a kind old-school gentleman who still wore a tie and jacket to the office, a man who believed in the weight of a word and the sanctity of a contract. He listened, his face growing grimmer with every word of my story. I didn't just tell him, I showed him. I laid the returned envelope on his polished mahogany desk. I handed him the printouts from Jessica's blog, the smiling family photos, the poisonous prose about shedding baggage. When I finished, he took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes, a gesture of profound, weary disgust. "Martha, this is unconscionable," he said, his voice quiet but laced with steel. "This is a cruelty of a kind I rarely encounter. To do this to any mother is a sin. To do it to a woman who dedicated her life to the very idea of connection, it's a special kind of evil." "It is what it is, Robert," I said, my voice steady. The validation from him, the shared sense of outrage, was like a steel rod being inserted into my spine. "The question is, what do we do about it?" "We do what is right," he said, his professional resolve kicking in. "We correct the record. We make a new ledger." I told him my wishes. I wanted David, Jessica, and their children Liam and Olivia removed from my will. Completely. I wanted the legacy I had so carefully built, the fruits of my American dream, to be redirected. I wanted every penny I had earned, every asset I owned, to be placed beyond their reach forever. "That is your absolute right," he said, nodding slowly. "But I would suggest we go one step further. A private change to a will can be contested. Given their behavior, they might try to claim you were not of sound mind, that you acted out of a momentary emotional peak. I suggest we make a public statement. Nothing dramatic. A simple, formal notice in the legal section of the newspaper. It's an old-fashioned move, but it creates an undeniable public record. It sends a clear legal signal that cannot be ignored. It informs them and the world that a formal change has been made." I agreed. The idea of a public notice, a small black-and-white declaration of their disinheritance, appealed to the postmistress in me. It was an official change of address for my legacy, a public and legal return to sender. While he drafted the new will and the legal notice for the Austin newspaper, I had another call to make. It was the most difficult call of all. I went home and sat at my kitchen table, my hand resting on the phone for a long time before I dialed. I was calling Sarah, David's first wife, the woman he had left behind in Charlotte. We hadn't truly spoken in over a decade. Our only connection was that annual Christmas card, a thin but resilient thread. I didn't know what I would say or how she would receive my call. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm and familiar, though touched with a note of surprise. "Martha? Is that you? Is everything all right?" And for the first time since this ordeal began, my composure cracked. The words tumbled out of me. The story of the returned card, the disconnected numbers, the blog post. I wasn't crying, but my voice was thick with a pain I could no longer conceal. The story pouring out like a river that had finally breached its dam. Sarah listened patiently without interruption. She made small sounds of sympathy, of shock, of anger on my behalf. When I finished, there was a moment of profound, empathetic silence on the other end of the line. "Oh, Martha," she said finally, and the genuine sorrow in her voice was a balm to my wounded soul. I'm so sorry. That is a terrible, heartless thing to do. I did not know who else to call, I admitted, my voice a whisper. I'm glad you called me, she said firmly. You are still family to me. To us. You always have been. We talked for over an hour. I asked about the children. My other grandchildren, the ones I hadn't seen in person since they were small. She told me about them with a mother's fierce pride. The boy, now 20, was in his second year at UNC Charlotte, studying engineering and working part-time to pay his tuition. The girl, 19, had just finished a course to become an electrician, a trade dominated by men, and was already getting more work than she could handle, her reputation for being meticulous and reliable spreading through the city. They were good kids, she said. Hardworking, kind, responsible. They had built a life of dignity and purpose, with no help from the father who had walked away from them. She told me about her own struggles, the years of working 2 jobs to make ends meet, the mortgage that was a constant, heavy weight on her shoulders, the car that was always on the verge of breaking down. She spoke without a trace of self-pity, only a quiet, weary resilience that I recognized as a mirror of my own. As I listened, a new plan began to form in my mind, a vision so clear and so right it felt like a divine revelation. I had been so focused on the legacy David had rejected. I had not considered the legacy that was waiting for me, the one that had been there all along in the quiet, steadfast life of the family he had abandoned. My American dream wasn't dead. It just had the wrong address. The next week, the legal notice ran in the classified section of the Austin American-Statesman. It was small, just 3 lines of dense type, buried among notices of estate sales and public auctions. But I knew it would be found. Jessica, in her obsessive curation of her online world, would surely scan the local paper for any mention of their names. The notice read, "Notice of amendment. Be it known that all previously named beneficiaries of the Martha Green Living Trust of Brevard, North Carolina, have been removed and replaced effective this date." My new will was signed and filed. My legacy now had a new, official forwarding address. It was no longer destined for a curated, soulless life in Texas. It was destined for a small, loving home in Charlotte, where it was not just wanted but needed. Where it would be received not as an entitlement but as a blessing. With the legal framework in place, there was one final act to perform. It was a personal ritual, a closing of the books on my own terms. It was the last letter I would ever send to my son, a final test of the impenetrable wall they had built around their new life. This was not about reconciliation. It was about confirmation. I went back to the drugstore and bought a single, elegant card. It was a heavy, cream-colored stock, the kind of card that feels important in your hand. It was blank inside. I found their new address in Austin easily enough. Jessica, in her endless quest for online validation, had tagged the location of their new modern home in one of her blog posts, complete with a picture of the sleek, minimalist mailbox out front. The irony was not lost on me. At my kitchen table, I wrote a simple final message, my handwriting as neat and steady as it had ever been. I hope you have found the life you were looking for. I did not sign it Mother or Grandma. Those titles no longer belonged to me in their world. I simply signed my name, Martha Green. A name, a person, a history they had tried to shed. Inside the card, I placed a cashier's check for $5,000. It was a significant sum, enough to be noticed, enough to represent a real choice. A check that would require them to physically endorse it, to acknowledge its sender. Then I sealed the envelope and mailed it just as I had mailed the birthday card weeks before. But this time I was not sending it with hope. I was sending it as a test, a final confirmation of what I already knew in my heart. I was sending a piece of mail I fully expected to be returned. I did not have to wait long. 10 days later, the handsome cream-colored envelope reappeared in my post office box. It was unopened. Scrawled across the front in Jessica's sharp, angry, and unmistakable handwriting were the words, "Return to sender. We do not accept." They had not even bothered to open it. They had seen my handwriting, my return address, and rejected it outright. Their commitment to their clean break was absolute. They had refused my final message without even knowing what it contained. I took the envelope home. This time there was no pain, no shock. There was only a quiet, profound sense of finality, a feeling of a chapter being closed with a satisfying thud. I had sent them one last chance at grace and they had returned it, unopened. The message was received. I performed my closing ritual with the precision of a lifelong postmistress. I took the unopened, rejected envelope and the $5,000 check to my bank, where I had the check officially canceled. The teller looked at me with curiosity, but I offered no explanation. I then went home and placed the returned envelope in a simple black frame. I hung it on the wall in my small study, next to my certificate of retirement from the U.S. Postal Service. It was my certificate of freedom, the proof that I had been officially and irrevocably released from my maternal obligations. The next day I began the process of dismantling my American life. I called a real estate agent and put my small, beloved house in Brevard on the market. It sold in a week to a young couple who fell in love with the view of the mountains from the porch. I went to the bank and closed out my accounts, consolidating my life savings, my husband's pension, and the proceeds from the sale of my home into a single cashier's check. The number was larger than I had ever imagined, the sum total of a lifetime of hard work, careful saving, and the American dream I had so diligently pursued. I drove to Charlotte one last time. I did not call Sarah beforehand. I simply appeared on her doorstep, a small elderly woman with a large envelope in her hand. When she opened the door, her face was a picture of shock and concern. "Martha, what are you doing here? Come in, come in." I stepped into her small, tidy home. It was filled with the comfortable, lived-in clutter of a real family. School pictures were on the mantelpiece. Books were stacked on the coffee table. It was a home, not a showroom. It felt warm and real. I did not sit down. I simply handed her the envelope. "This is for you, Sarah," I said. Her hands trembled as she opened it and saw the check inside. She stared at the number, her eyes wide with disbelief. Her face went pale. "Martha, I can't accept this. This is your entire life." "It is," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "And I am giving it to you. My son chose to abandon his family and his history. I am choosing to honor it. This is not a gift. It is a restoration. It is the legacy he threw away, and I am giving it to the family that deserves it." I had written a letter which was also in the envelope. It laid out my wishes in clear, simple terms. "Pay off your mortgage," I had written, "so you can live in your own home without fear. Put the rest in a trust for the children's education, so they can build their own dreams without the burden of debt. And use whatever is left to live a good, happy life. Know that a grandmother you may not remember loved you very much." Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she read the letter. She tried to speak, to protest, her words choked with emotion, but I simply put a finger to her lips. "There is nothing to discuss," I said gently. "A gift, when it is sent with love, should be accepted." I turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the doorway, clutching the future I had just handed her. I did not look back. I had delivered my final, most important piece of mail. My American legacy now had a new and rightful home. The furious, sputtering phone call from David came 2 days later, just as I knew it would. He had seen the legal notice. His voice, stripped of its usual corporate polish, was raw with a mixture of disbelief and rage. It was the sound of a man who had just discovered the bank account he thought was full was, in fact, empty. "What have you done?" he yelled into the phone, his voice cracking. "The notice in the paper. My lawyer said you've changed everything. You can't do that. That's my inheritance. Our inheritance." I sat on the porch of the small motel room I had rented, looking out at the mountains that had been my home for so long. They looked peaceful, ancient, and indifferent to my small human drama. I felt a profound sense of peace. The storm was finally breaking over his head, not mine. "It's already done, David," I said calmly. "But you have no right," he sputtered, his voice escalating into a near shriek. "That was for us. For your grandchildren." "My grandchildren in Charlotte will be well taken care of," I replied, my voice as steady as the mountains before me. "As for you, David, your inheritance was a lifetime of my love and support. You returned it. You marked it, address unknown. I am simply honoring your choice." I paused, letting the silence stretch, then delivered the line I had been rehearsing in my mind, the final postmark on our relationship. "If you can move without a goodbye, I can move on without you in my estate." I did not wait for his response. I did not need to hear his threats or his pathetic, self-serving justifications. I gently placed the receiver back in its cradle, severing the last frayed thread of our connection. The silence that followed was the most liberating sound I had ever heard. My life in America was now a closed chapter. I had tied up all the loose ends. I had sold my house, given away my money, and said my final, unspoken goodbye. There was nothing left for me here. The American dream I had worked so hard to build had been realized, just not by the person I had intended it for. And that was all right. But my story was not over. It was simply time to return to the first chapter. From my motel room I made one last important call. It was a call across the ocean, a call to a number I knew by heart, a call to a voice that was a part of my own soul. My younger sister, Akua, answered from her home in Aburi, Ghana. Akojua, she said, using my Ghanaian name, a name I had not heard spoken with such love in years. The sound of it was like a key turning in a lock deep inside me. I am here, Akua, I said, and the sound of my own language, the familiar musical cadence of Twi, was like a balm on a wound I didn't know was still so raw. When are you coming home? She asked. It was the same question she had asked me every year for 50 years, a loving, hopeful refrain across a vast ocean. And for the first time my answer was different. I am on my way, I said, the words tasting of relief and release of mangoes and red earth. I am coming home now. I did not need to explain. He did not need to ask. In the warm silence on the line she understood. I was done. A week later I was at Charlotte Douglas International Airport. I had a single suitcase with me. It did not contain the mementos of my American life. It contained only a few simple clothes, my passport, and the framed, returned envelope, my personal declaration of independence. I had left everything else behind. As I sat at the gate waiting to board the flight to Accra, I felt no sadness, no regret. I had built an American dream, a beautiful, sturdy structure, and I had given it to a family who would cherish it. My work here was done. My son had wanted a clean break, a life with no strings attached. I had given it to him. He was now completely, utterly free of me. And I, in turn, was finally free of the burden of a love that was not wanted, free of a dream that was not mine to dream anymore. I was not a woman without a country. I was a woman who was finally returning to her own. My journey was not an escape from a painful ending, but a joyful return to my truest beginning. I was Martha Akojua Green, a daughter of Aburi, and I was going home,